Hello, my name is Dan Spencer. I'm a historian of the early history of gunpowder weapons in England. In this short talk, I will be discussing gunpowder weapons and the Battle of Bosworth. The English had been using guns for some time by 1485, having first adopted them in the early 14th century. They are recorded as having been used at the Battle of Crecy in 1346, but initially were primarily used in siege warfare. From the 1360s onwards, small guns were routinely used to furnish the arsenals of castles and towns. The first decade of the 15th century saw the emergence of large, heavy guns that later became known as bombards. These weapons were capable of knocking down fortifications and soon became an essential element of siege warfare. The guns of this period were made out of wrought iron or cast bronze and had one or more removable powder chambers. The outbreak of the Wars of the Roses in the 1450s coincided with the adoption by the English of field artillery. These guns were mounted on wooden carriages, pulled by horses which could be manoeuvred into position. They were employed at most of the major battles of the Wars of the Roses, including Towton, Barnet, Tewkesbury and Bosworth. So, what types of field guns were in use at the time of Bosworth? The most commonly used guns on the battlefield were known as serpentines. This name derived from their serpent-like shape, with their long, thin barrels capable of firing projectiles over long distances, which made them ideal for targeting enemy personnel. These guns varied enormously in size, but a set of accounts detailing the construction of artillery, dating from the 1450s, can be used as an example to indicate their approximate dimensions. In this document, serpentines are recorded as having weighed 210 pounds each on average, were either 7.5 or 8.5 feet in length, and fired shot weighing 2.5 or 3.5 pounds. Other guns employed on the battlefield included cart guns, fowlers, and organ guns. Handguns were in use at this time, but tended to be used by foreign soldiers due to the dominance of the English longbow. For example, Edward IV was said to have been accompanied by 300 Flemish handgunners when he returned to England to reclaim his crown in 1471. It is quite possible that some of the French soldiers in the Tudor army were equipped with these weapons. By the late 15th century, 3 different types of ammunition were in use. The most common type were stone balls carved by masons, known as gunstones, followed by lead bullets, and finally, iron shot. These projectiles were propelled by gunpowder. This was formed from 3 components: saltpeter, otherwise known as potassium nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal. By this period, the ratios of these components have been optimized for the use of different types of guns. How many guns were present at Bosworth? The answer is, we do not know. We lack administrative or financial evidence, such as lists of numbers of guns or gunners for the campaign, whereas narrative sources need to be treated with caution. For instance, the Battle of Bosworth field claims that Richard had 140 serpentines and a similar number of bombards. However, this is a much later source, which appears to employ a great deal of poetic license. Henry Tudor may have taken some field guns with him from France, or acquired others en route to Bosworth, but Richard clearly had a major advantage in artillery. Richard could draw upon the arsenal at the Tower of London, which had been established by his late brother, Edward IV, and the expertise of gunners in his service. So, how are guns used during the battle? The difficulty we have is that many of the main narrative sources, such as the accounts of Polydore Virgil and the Crowland continuation, fail to mention their presence. The Chronicle of Jean Molinet, however, does provide some interesting information. Quote, "The king had the artillery of his army fire on the Earl of Richmond, and so the French, knowing by the king's shot the lie of the land and the order of his battle, resolved, in order to avoid the fire, to mass their troops against the flank rather than the front of the king's battle." We can also gain some insights from comparisons with other battles at the period. The history of the arrival of Edward IV, for example, provides interesting information about the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471. At Tewkesbury, the Yorkists had a clear advantage in artillery. This was said to have been conveniently deployed in front of their army, whose gunfire sore oppressed their Lancastrian enemies, which provoked them into launching a disorganised attack disastrous consequences. It is quite probable that Richard, who had fought at Tewkesbury, sought to utilise his artillery in the same way at Bosworth, by forcing his opponents to go onto the offensive. If so, this gambit was quite clearly a failure. This could be, as Molinet suggests, because the Tudor army succeeded in avoiding the worst of the Yorkists' gunfire. Archaeological research has also proved to be very fruitful in this area. The work carried out by Glenn Ford and other archaeologists has not only identified the site of the battle, but has also revealed their widespread presence on the battlefield.